Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Life-Changing True Stories. Today I bring you a powerful and deeply loving story. Grand ballroom of the Celestial Hotel sparkled like a jewel box under 1,000 crystal chandeliers. Emma Torres moved carefully through the crowd, her hands steadying the silver tray laden with champagne flutes. The fabric of her simple black uniform felt stiff against her skin, a reminder that she belonged to the staff, not the glittering guests who laughed and clinked glasses around her. At 24, Emma had worked hard to become an event coordinator for premier events. Though tonight, she was helping serve because they were short-staffed. Her mother, a hard-working nurse who raised Emma alone, had always taught her that honest work was nothing to be ashamed of. But as Emma watched women in designer gowns and men in tailored suits, she could not help feeling the weight of the distance between their world and hers. The charity gala was the social event of the season, bringing together the wealthiest and most powerful people in the city. Emma had helped plan every detail, from the floral arrangements to the seating chart. She knew this event had to be perfect. Then the whispers started. A ripple of excitement moved through the crowd like wind across water. Emma turned to see what had captured everyone's attention, and her breath caught in her throat. Julian Blackwood had arrived. Even from across the room, his presence was magnetic. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the confidence of a man who had never questioned his place in the world. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his charcoal suit fit him like it had been painted on. But it was his eyes that struck Emma most. They were a deep gray, sharp and assessing, missing nothing. Julian Blackwood owned the Celestial Hotel chain, with properties in every major city around the globe. At 32, he had transformed his family's modest hotel business into an empire. The newspapers called him brilliant. His competitors called him ruthless. Everyone agreed he was untouchable. Emma forced herself to look away and focus on her work. She had champagne to deliver, and the last thing she needed was to be caught staring at a guest like some starstruck teenager. She made her way toward the VIP section, where the most important donors were seated. The marble floor gleamed like ice beneath her feet. Her supervisor had warned her to be extra careful in this area. One mistake here could cost Premier Events the contract. Emma was only a few steps from the main table when it happened. A server rushing past bumped into her from behind. The impact was slight, but it was enough. Emma's heel caught on the edge of a slightly raised floor panel. Time seemed to slow down as she felt herself falling forward, the tray tipping in her hands. She tried to catch herself, tried to stop what was happening, but gravity was merciless. The champagne flutes tumbled through the air in a glittering arc. The golden liquid seemed to hang in the air for a heartbeat. Before splashing down in a wave across Julian Blackwood's pristine suit, the sound of breaking glass cut through the music and conversation like a knife. Silence fell over the ballroom, heavy and absolute. Every eye turned toward the disaster. Emma stood frozen, her empty tray still in her hands, her face burning with shame as champagne dripped from Julian's jacket onto the floor. For a long moment, Julian did not move. He looked down at his ruined suit, his expression unreadable. Then his gray eyes lifted to meet Emma's, and she felt the coldness in them like a physical blow. "I am so sorry," Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "It was an accident. Please, let me help." She reached toward him with a napkin, but Julian stepped back, his lip curling slightly in distaste. "Do not touch me," he said, his voice low, but carrying clearly in the silent room. "You have done enough damage." Emma's hand fell to her side. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. Julian's gaze swept over her dismissively. "Events like this require professionals, not clumsy amateurs. Perhaps you should consider a different line of work." The words landed like blows. Around them, Emma could hear muffled laughter and whispered comments. She saw cell phones raised, capturing her humiliation for social media. Tomorrow, everyone would know about the girl who had dumped champagne on Julian Blackwood. "Sir, I sincerely apologize," Emma managed to say, her voice stronger now, despite the pain crushing her chest. "This was entirely my fault, and I take full responsibility." Julian did not respond. He simply removed his jacket, handed it to one of his assistants, and walked toward the exit without looking back. The crowd parted for him like water around a stone. Emma stood there for another moment, aware of all the eyes on her, all the judgment. Then her supervisor appeared at her elbow, his face red with anger. "My office." "Now," he hissed. The walk through the ballroom felt endless. Emma kept her head high, even as shame threatened to drown her. She had worked so hard to build her reputation, to prove she belonged in this industry. Now, in one terrible moment, it had all come crashing down. In her supervisor's office, the lecture was brutal. Mr. Harrison paced back and forth, his voice rising with each sentence. "Do you have any idea who Julian Blackwood is? Do you understand what you have done? That man could destroy this company with one phone call." "I know," Emma said quietly. "I am truly sorry. It was an accident. An accident that might cost us everything." Mr. Harrison slammed his hand on the desk. "Go home, Emma. I will call you tomorrow about whether you still have a job." Emma changed out of her uniform in the staff bathroom, her hand shaking as she pulled on her jeans and sweater. When she finally stepped outside, the cool night air hit her face. But it did not wash away the humiliation burning in her chest. She walked 4 blocks without knowing where she was going. The city lights blurred through her tears. By the time she reached her small apartment, her feet ached and her eyes were swollen from crying. Inside, Emma collapsed onto her worn couch and let the tears come fully. She cried for her ruined career, for the shame of being mocked in front of hundreds of people, for the cruelty in Julian Blackwood's eyes when he looked at her like she was nothing. But as the night wore on and the tears finally stopped, something harder settled in Emma's chest. Anger, not at Julian, exactly, though his words had cut deep. Anger at herself for caring so much what people like him thought. Anger at a world where one mistake could define you, where accidents were unforgivable if they inconvenienced the wrong person. By the time dawn light crept through her window, Emma had made a decision. She would not let this destroy her. She would not give Julian Blackwood or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her quit. Whatever happened next, she would face it with her head high. The next morning, Mr. Harrison called. "You still have your job," he said without preamble. Julian Blackwood sent word that he does not want anyone punished over the incident. He said it was not worth his time to pursue. Emma should have felt relief. Instead, she felt a fresh wave of anger. Not worth his time. As if she were so insignificant that even her mistakes did not matter enough to acknowledge. "Thank you," she said, keeping her voice professional. "I will be in the office within the hour." When she arrived at Premier Events, her coworkers avoided her eyes. Some whispered when she passed. Emma ignored them all and threw herself into her work with fierce determination. She would show everyone that she was more than one embarrassing moment. She would prove that Emma Torres was not someone to be dismissed. But late at night, when she was alone, Julian Blackwood's cold gray eyes still haunted her dreams. Along with those cutting words that had stripped away her dignity in front of the world, she told herself she would never forgive him for that. She told herself she never wanted to see him again. Emma had no way of knowing that fate had very different plans, that the man who had humiliated her would soon become impossible to avoid. The wheels of destiny were already turning, pulling them back together in ways neither could predict or prevent. 6 months passed like a slow-healing wound. Emma threw herself into her work with an intensity that surprised even her closest colleagues. She arrived early, stayed late, and volunteered for every difficult project that came through Premier Events. Her supervisor, Mr. Harrison, noticed the change. The nervous coordinator who had once apologized for taking up space had transformed into someone decisive and confident. Emma's reputation grew steadily. Clients requested her specifically for their events. She had a gift for anticipating problems before they happened and solving them with grace. The night of the champagne incident became a distant memory for most people. Though Emma still carried it quietly inside her like a small stone in her shoe, she dated occasionally but nothing serious. Her friend Rachel from work kept trying to set her up, insisting that Emma needed to have some fun and stop working herself into exhaustion. But Emma found it hard to trust easily after being so publicly humiliated. She had built walls around herself, and she was not ready to let anyone climb them. Then, on a gray Tuesday morning in March, everything changed again. Mr. Harrison called an emergency staff meeting. Everyone crowded into the conference room, confusion rippling through the team. These unscheduled meetings usually meant either a major new client or serious trouble. Mr. Harrison stood at the front of the room, his expression unreadable. "I have important news," he began, his voice carefully neutral. "Premier Events has been acquired. As of today, We are now part of the Blackwood Hospitality Group." The room erupted in whispers. Emma felt her blood run cold. Blackwood. The name echoed in her mind like a warning bell. "Julian Blackwood himself will be overseeing the transition," Mr. Harrison continued. "He arrives next Monday to meet with department heads and key staff members. I expect everyone to be professional and welcoming." Emma barely heard the rest of the meeting. Her mind was spinning. Of all the companies in the city, of all the possible buyers, it had to be him. The man whose suit she had ruined. The man who had called her clumsy and suggested she'd find a different career. Now he would be her ultimate boss. Rachel leaned over and whispered, "Are you okay? You look like you saw a ghost." "I am fine," Emma lied, forcing a smile. "Just surprised, that is all." That weekend, Emma barely slept. She rehearsed what she would say if Julian remembered her. She practiced looking confident and unbothered. She told herself that 6 months was a long time, and important men like Julian Blackwood probably did not remember every server who had made a mistake at an event. But deep down, she knew. Some moments were too memorable to forget. Monday morning arrived too quickly. Emma dressed carefully in her most professional outfit, a navy blue dress with a structured blazer. She applied her makeup with precision, using it like armor. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone poised and capable. She hoped Julian would see the same thing. The office buzzed with nervous energy. People straightened their desks and practiced their greetings. At exactly 9 o'clock, Julian Blackwood walked through the doors of Premier Events. Flanked by 2 assistants and an air of absolute authority, he looked exactly as Emma remembered. Tall and commanding in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and those gray eyes swept over the office with cool assessment. But something was different too. There were faint shadows under his eyes, and his jaw seemed tighter, as if he carried tensions that had not been there before. Emma stayed at her desk, pretending to review a spreadsheet while her heart hammered in her chest. She watched from the corner of her eye as Julian met with Mr. Harrison and toured the facilities. She prayed he would not notice her in the sea of staff members. Her prayers went unanswered. "I would like to meet with your top coordinators," Julian's voice carried across the office, starting with Emma Torres. Time stopped. Every head in the office turned toward Emma. She felt Rachel's hand squeeze her shoulder in support. Slowly, Emma stood, smoothing her dress and lifting her chin. She walked toward Mr. Harrison's office where Julian waited, each step measured and deliberate. When she entered, Julian was standing by the window, his back to her. Mr. Harrison gestured for her to sit, then excused himself, leaving them alone. The silence stretched. Emma sat with her hands folded in her lap, waiting. Finally, Julian turned around, and their eyes met for the first time in 6 months. Recognition flashed across his face immediately. His expression remained neutral, but Emma saw the slight widening of his eyes, the pause before he spoke. "Emma Torres," he said, and his voice was unreadable. "The coordinator who has been receiving excellent reviews from every client she handles." "Yes, sir," Emma replied, keeping her voice steady. "I work hard to ensure client satisfaction." Julian moved to sit behind the desk, his movements controlled and precise. He studied her for a long moment, and Emma refused to look away or show weakness. "Do you remember me?" he asked finally. Emma's pulse quickened, but she kept her expression calm. "Of course, Mr. Blackwood, the charity gala, 6 months ago. I ruined your suit and you suggested I consider a different career." A flicker of something crossed Julian's face. Surprise, perhaps, or discomfort. "You remember that?" "It is difficult to forget being humiliated in front of 500 people, Emma said, her tone professional, but with an edge of steel. "But as you can see, I did not take your advice. I stayed in this career, and I got better at it." Julian leaned back in his chair, and for the first time, something that might have been respect entered his expression. "So I see. Your performance reviews are exceptional," Mr. Harrison says. "You are his most reliable coordinator." "I am glad my work speaks for itself," Emma replied. Another pause. Julian's fingers drummed once on the desk, the only sign of any emotion beneath his composed exterior. "I need a new executive assistant. Someone who understands event management and hospitality operations. Someone detail-oriented and unafraid of challenges." He paused. "I want you for the position." Emma's breath caught. Of all the things she had expected, this was not one of them. You want me to be your assistant? Yes. The position comes with a significant salary increase and opportunities for advancement. You would work directly with me, coordinating high-level events and managing key client relationships. Emma's mind raced. Part of her wanted to refuse on principle. This was the man who had wounded her pride so deeply. But another part of her saw the opportunity for what it was. A chance to prove herself at the highest level, to show Julian Blackwood exactly who Emma Torres really was. Am I asked why you chose me? Emma said carefully. Julian's gray eyes held hers. Because your file shows you are capable, and because I believe in second impressions. You made a mistake once. What you did afterward tells me more about your character than that single moment. The words hung in the air between them. Emma felt something shift in her chest, some small crack in the wall she had built around the memory of that terrible night. I accept, she said. When do I start? Tomorrow, Julian replied. 6 in the morning. Do not be late. As Emma left the office, her legs felt unsteady. Rachel rushed over immediately. What happened? What did he say? Emma shook her head, still processing. I just became Julian Blackwood's executive assistant. What? Rachel's eyes went wide. Emma, that is amazing. But also, are you sure? After what happened? I am sure, Emma said, and she realized she meant it. This is my chance to show him I am not the person he saw that night. I am more than one mistake. That evening, Emma stood in her apartment, looking at the city lights through her window. Tomorrow, her life would change again. She would be working side by side with the man who had once dismissed her as unworthy. The thought terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. Emma did not sleep much that night. But when dawn came, she was ready. She dressed in her sharpest business attire, styled her hair with care, applied makeup that made her look confident and professional. When she looked in the mirror, she saw someone who could stand toe-to-toe with Julian Blackwood. She arrived at the Blackwood Hospitality. Headquarters at 5:45 in the morning. The building was sleek glass and steel, towering over the city. Emma's new office was next to Julian's. It's connected by a door that stood open. Julian was already there, working at his desk, despite the early hour. He looked up when Emma entered. You were early, he observed. I believe in being prepared, Emma replied smoothly. Something that might have been approval flickered in his eyes. Good. We have a lot of work to do. The Paris property is having issues with their event bookings. I need a full analysis by this afternoon. And so it began. The days that followed were intense and demanding. Julian pushed Emma hard, testing her abilities at every turn. He gave her impossible deadlines and complex problems. But Emma rose to every challenge. She worked late into the night, mastering the intricacies of Blackwood Hospitality's operations. She learned to anticipate Julian's needs before he voiced them. To solve problems he had not even identified yet. Slowly, grudgingly, Julian's cold professionalism began to thaw. He started asking for her opinions in meetings. He trusted her with more responsibility. The walls between them remained, but they were no longer quite so high. Then came the trip to Paris. We are flying out tomorrow, Julian informed her one evening. The Paris property needs hands-on management for their upcoming gala season. We will be there for a week. Emma's heart skipped. A week in Paris with Julian Blackwood. The thought filled her with emotions she did not want to examine too closely. Paris was beautiful in the spring. The cherry blossoms were blooming and the Seine sparkled in the sunlight. They stayed at the Blackwood Paris, a magnificent property near the Champs-Élysées. Emma had her own suite, but she barely saw it. She and Julian worked from dawn until late into the night, transforming the hotel's event operations. On the third evening, after another long day, Julian suggested they have dinner. Not a business meeting, he clarified. Just dinner. You have earned it. They went to a small restaurant near the hotel, a place that felt intimate and warm rather than showy. Over wine and excellent food, they talked about things that had nothing to do with work. Emma learned that Julian loved classical music, but could not carry a tune. She discovered he had traveled to 43 countries but still thought Paris was the most beautiful city in the world, and Julian learned. About Emma, about her mother, who had worked double shifts to send her to college. About her dreams of running her own event company someday. About the books she loved and the art that moved her as the evening wore on. Emma noticed Julian looking at her differently. The coldness in his gray eyes had melted away, replaced by something warmer and more dangerous. "I owe you an apology," Julian said suddenly, setting down his wine glass. "For that night at the gala. The things I said to you were cruel and unnecessary. You made an honest mistake, and I treated you as if you were worthless. I am sorry, Emma. Truly sorry." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. She had waited 6 months to hear those words, though she had never admitted to herself how much she needed them. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." Julian reached across the table and took her hand. The touch sent electricity through Emma's entire body. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. "I have worked with dozens of assistants over the years, but none of them had your intelligence, your dedication, your fire. You challenge me, Emma. You make me think differently. You make me want to be better." Emma's breath caught. The restaurant seemed to fade away until there was only Julian's hand in hers, his gray eyes looking at her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Julian," she began, but she did not know how to finish. He stood, still holding her hand, and gently pulled her to her feet. They left money on the table and walked out into the Paris night. The streets were quiet, lit by old-fashioned street lamps. They walked along the Seine in silence, hands still clasped. When they reached the bridge near their hotel, Julian stopped and turned to face her. "I am going to kiss you now," he said softly. "If you do not want me to, tell me now." Emma could not speak. Instead, she reached up and pulled him down to her. Their lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home and jumping off a cliff at the same time. Julian's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. And Emma melted into him. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Julian rested his forehead against hers. "This changes everything," he murmured. "I know," Emma whispered back. They stood there on the bridge, holding each other as the Seine flowed beneath them and the lights of Paris sparkled around them. Emma knew that crossing this line was dangerous. Julian was still her boss. There would be complications and challenges ahead, but in that moment, with his arms around her and the taste of him still on her lips, Emma could not bring herself to care about the risks. Sometimes she realized the heart knows things the mind cannot yet understand. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, under the stars of Paris, Emma Torres allowed herself to fall. The return from Paris changed everything and nothing at the same time. Emma and Julian tried to maintain professionalism at the office, but the air between them crackled with an energy that everyone could feel, even if no one dared to comment. They kept their relationship private, stealing moments together in the evenings after work, sharing quiet dinners and long conversations that stretched into the night. For 3 blissful months, they existed in a bubble of their own making. Emma discovered layers to Julian she had never imagined existed. Behind the cold exterior was a man who read poetry, who donated anonymously to children's hospitals, who still called his grandmother every Sunday. He was haunted by the pressure of living up to his family's expectations, of being perfect in a world that allowed no room for mistakes. And Julian discovered that Emma was not just intelligent and capable, but fierce and funny and unafraid to call him out when his arrogance showed. She made him laugh in ways he had not laughed in years. She made him feel human instead of just successful, but happiness. Emma was learning, always comes with a price. The first crack appeared on a Tuesday afternoon. Emma was reviewing contracts in her office when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. When she opened it, her blood turned to ice. It was a photograph of her and Julian leaving a restaurant together, her arm around her waist, her head on his shoulder. Below the photo was a simple message. "Interesting relationship for an executive and his assistant. I wonder what the board would think." Emma's hands trembled as she stared at the screen. Before she could process what was happening, another message arrived. Then another. Each one contained photos from different dates, different locations. Someone had been following them for weeks. She walked to Julian's office on unsteady legs. He looked up from his computer, his expression shifting immediately when he saw her face. "What is wrong?" Wordlessly, Emma handed him her phone. She watched the color drain from his face as he scrolled through the messages. His jaw tightened, and the cold mask she had not seen in months slipped back into place. "Victoria," he said quietly, his voice hard as stone. "Who is Victoria?" Emma asked, though part of her already knew the answer would hurt. Julian set down the phone and ran a hand through his hair. My ex-fiancée. We were engaged 2 years ago. She is also a major shareholder in Blackwood Hospitality. When I broke off the engagement, she did not take it well. Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach. You were engaged. It was a business arrangement more than anything else, Julian said quickly. Our families wanted the merger. I realized before it was too late that I could not marry someone I did not love, but Victoria has never forgiven me for embarrassing her. Before Emma could respond, Julian's assistant knocked urgently on the door. Mr. Blackwood, the board has called an emergency meeting. They are requesting your presence immediately. Julian's eyes met Emma's, and she saw fear there for the first time. This is Victoria's doing. She is trying to force me out by creating a scandal. The emergency board meeting was brutal. Emma was not allowed inside, but she heard pieces through the closed doors. Accusations of inappropriate conduct. Questions about whether Julian's judgment was compromised. Demands that Emma be terminated to protect the company's reputation. Julian emerged 2 hours later, his face like carved marble. Go home, he told Emma, his voice clipped. I will handle this. Julian, we need to talk about this together. I said go home. His tone was sharp enough to cut, and Emma flinched. She saw immediately that he regretted it, saw his expression soften. But the damage was done. Emma gathered her things and left, fighting back tears until she reached her car. Then she drove home in a blur, her mind spinning with fear and anger and confusion. That night, Julian came to her apartment. He looked exhausted, the shadows under his eyes darker than she had ever seen them. The board wants me to end our relationship, he said without preamble. Victoria convinced them that you are a distraction, that the scandal will damage the company. They are threatening to push for my removal as CEO, unless I comply. Emma's heart shattered, but she kept her voice steady. What are you going to do? Julian crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. I am going to fight for us. I do not care what it costs me. But the cost turned out to be higher than either of them imagined. The next morning, Emma arrived at work to find her office being cleared out. Mr. Harrison stood nearby, looking miserable. Ma, I am so sorry. The board voted to terminate your employment effective immediately. They claim it is to avoid conflict of interest. Emma felt the world tilt beneath her feet. They cannot do this. I have done nothing wrong. I know, Mr. Harrison said quietly, but they have the power, and they are using it. Worse was yet to come. By afternoon, an email had circulated through the company's internal system, claiming that Emma had leaked confidential information about the Paris property to a competitor. The accusation was absurd, but it was accompanied by falsified evidence showing her computer login accessing restricted files. Emma's phone rang. Constantly, his former colleagues called to ask if it was true. Her professional reputation, built so carefully over years, was being destroyed in a matter of hours. Julian was in meetings all day and could not be reached. Emma sat in her apartment, watching her career crumble around her, feeling more alone than she had since the night of the champagne incident. By evening, the story had leaked to the press. Blackwood CEO in scandal with former assistant read the headlines. The articles painted Emma as an opportunist who had seduced her boss and stolen company secrets. Social media exploded with commentary, most of it cruel. When Julian finally called, his voice was raw with fury and guilt. Emma, I am so sorry. Victoria orchestrated all of this. I am working to prove the evidence was falsified, but it will take time. How much time? Emma asked, her voice hollow. How long before my name is cleared? Before people stop thinking I am a thief and a liar? I do not know, Julian admitted, but I promise you I will fix this. I will make them all see the truth. And what about us? Emma asked quietly. Your board made their position clear. As long as we are together, they will keep coming after me. After both of us. The silence on the other end of the line was answer enough. I love you, Emma, Julian said finally, and his voice broke on the words. I love you more than I have ever loved anyone. But I cannot watch them destroy you because of me. So what are you saying? Emma asked, though she already knew. I am saying that maybe we need to step back. Just temporarily until I can sort this out with the board and clear your name. Once the pressure is off, once I have dealt with Victoria. No, Emma interrupted, her voice suddenly strong. No, Julian. I will not be your secret. I will not hide and wait while you try to make me acceptable to people who have already decided I am not good enough. I deserve better than that. Emma, please, I love you, Emma said, tears streaming down her face. I love you so much it terrifies me. But I will not lose myself trying to fit into your world. I did nothing wrong, and I will not act like I did. She ended the call before he could respond and collapsed onto her couch, sobbing into the cushions. Everything had fallen apart so quickly. Her job, her reputation, her relationship with Julian. She felt like she was back in that ballroom 6 months ago, humiliated and powerless. But as the night wore on and the tears finally stopped, Emma remembered something. She had survived that night. She had rebuilt herself once before. She could do it again. The next morning, Emma hired a lawyer and began fighting back. She demanded access to the server logs that would prove the evidence against her was falsified. She reached out to every client she had ever worked with, asking them to provide testimonials about her character and professionalism. She refused to hide or disappear. Julian, meanwhile, waged his own war. He investigated Victoria's activities and discovered she had bribed the IT specialist to plant the false evidence. He brought his findings to the board, demanding Emma's full vindication and threatening legal action if they did not comply. But his father, Richard Blackwood, stood in his way. Richard was the founder of Blackwood Hospitality, a formidable man who had built an empire from nothing. He had always been distant and demanding, measuring his son's worth in profit margins and stock prices. And he made his position clear in a private meeting with Julian. You will end this relationship with that woman, Richard said coldly. She is a distraction and a liability. The Blackwood name has stood for excellence for 40 years. I will not watch you destroy it over some infatuation. Julian stood before his father, and for the first time in his life, he did not back down. Emma Torres is the best thing that has ever happened to me. She is brilliant and principled and stronger than anyone I have ever met. And I will not give her up to satisfy your outdated ideas about image and reputation. Richard's face darkened with anger. Then you leave me no choice. If you continue this relationship, I will have the board remove you as CEO. I still control enough shares to make it happen. You will lose everything. Then I lose everything, Julian said quietly. But I will not lose her. The words hung in the air between father and son. Richard stared at Julian as if seeing him for the first time, this man who is willing to sacrifice his entire future for love. You are a fool, Richard said finally. Maybe Julian agreed. But I am my own fool now, not yours. He walked out of his father's office and drove straight to Emma's apartment. She opened the door in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, her eyes red from crying. She looked beautiful to him. I chose you, Julian said without preamble. The board is meeting tomorrow to vote on removing me as CEO. My father is leading the charge. I am going to lose Blackwood Hospitality. I am going to lose everything I have worked for my entire life. He stepped closer, taking her hands in his, and I do not care, because none of it means anything without you. Emma stared at him, tears streaming down her face. Julian, you cannot throw away your entire life for me. I am not throwing it away, he said softly. I am choosing what actually matters. You told me once that you would not lose yourself trying to fit into my world. Well, I am done trying to fit into a world that does not have room for the person I love. I choose you, Emma. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. Emma threw her arms around him, and they held each other while the sun set outside her window. They had no idea what the future would bring, but they knew they would face it together. The board meeting the next day was exactly as brutal as expected. Richard Blackwood made his case for Julian's removal, citing poor judgment and damaged reputation. Several board members agreed. But then something unexpected happened. One of the longest-serving board members, an elderly woman named Margaret Chen, stood up. I have been with this company since Richard founded it, she said. I have watched it grow from a single hotel to a global empire. And in all those years, I have never seen a CEO as dedicated or innovative as Julian Blackwood. He transformed this company for the modern age. And now you want to remove him because he fell in love? Because he had the courage to choose happiness over appearances. Other board members began to speak up, echoing her sentiments. The younger members especially pushed back against Richard's ultimatum. They pointed out that Julian's relationship with Emma, once the false accusations were proven untrue, was not actually a violation of any policy. They noted that consumer attitudes about workplace relationships had evolved, and that the scandal would blow over much faster if they supported Julian rather than punishing him. In the end, the vote to remove Julian failed. Richard Blackwood left the meeting in fury, threatening to sell his shares. But Julian remained as CEO, and Emma's name was officially cleared of all accusations. Victoria faced legal consequences for her falsification of evidence and harassment. She lost her position on the board and her shares in the company. 2 months later, on a perfect spring morning, Emma stood in a garden filled with white roses and cherry blossoms. She wore a simple but elegant wedding dress that her mother had helped her choose. Tears streaming down both their faces as they looked at it together. Rachel stood beside her as maid of honor, squeezing her hand. "Are you ready?" Emma nodded, her heart full to bursting. "I have never been more ready for anything." The music began, and she walked down the aisle toward Julian. He stood at the altar in a charcoal suit, his gray eyes shining with love and tears. His father was not there, but Margaret Chen sat in the front row, beaming with approval. When Emma reached Julian, he took her hands and whispered, "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They wrote their own vows, promising to always choose each other, to face challenges together, to build a life based on love rather than expectations. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Julian pulled Emma close and kissed her as their friends and family cheered. It was a kiss that tasted like champagne and second chances, like pain transformed into joy. At the reception, Emma stood with Julian under the lights, swaying to soft music. "Do you remember the night we met?" she asked, smiling up at him. Julian laughed. "How could I forget? You ruined my favorite suit. You called me clumsy and told me to find a new career," Emma reminded him. But there was no bitterness in her voice now, only amusement. "I was an arrogant fool," Julian said, pulling her closer. "Thank God you did not listen to me. Thank God you eventually apologized," Emma countered. They danced in comfortable silence for a moment before Julian spoke again. "I have something to tell you. I made a decision this week." Emma looked up at him curiously. "What kind of decision?" "I am stepping down as CEO of Blackwood Hospitality," Julian said. "I am staying on as a board member, but I am giving up the day-to-day operations. I want to start something new, something that is ours. You and me, building an event and hospitality consulting company together, equal partners in everything." Emma's eyes widened. "Julian, are you sure? Blackwood Hospitality is your life," "No," he said softly, cupping her face in his hands. "You are my life. Everything else is just work. And I want to build something with you, something that reflects who we both are. What do you say?" Emma's answer was another kiss, this one lasting long enough that their guests began to whistle and cheer. 6 months after the wedding, Emma walked into their new office space, a bright modern loft in the heart of the city. Torres Blackwood Consulting was officially open for business. Their first client was Margaret Chen, who wanted them to manage a gala for a charity she supported. As Emma set up her desk, she felt Julian's arms wrap around her from behind. She leaned back against him, completely content. "I have more news," Emma said, her voice soft. "Good news or bad news?" Julian asked, kissing her temple. Emma turned in his arms and took his hand, placing it on her still flat stomach. She watched as understanding dawned in his eyes, watched them go wide with wonder and joy. "We are having a baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We are having a baby," Emma confirmed, tears streaming down her face. Julian dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead against her stomach. His shoulders shook with the force of his emotions. When he looked up at her, his face was wet with tears. "I love you," he said. "I love you both so much." Emma ran her fingers through his hair, her own tears falling freely. She thought about the night they met, about the champagne and the humiliation and the pain. She thought about every challenge they had faced, every obstacle they had overcome. And she realized that sometimes the worst moments of our lives are just the beginning of something beautiful. Sometimes we have to fall apart before we can come together in a way that lasts, as the sun set over the city. Painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Emma and Julian held each other in the office of the business they had built together. Outside, the world kept turning. But inside, they had everything they needed. They had each other. They had a future full of possibilities, and they had the courage to face whatever came next, together. The worst night of Emma Torres's life had indeed made her the wife of the most desired man in the city. But more importantly, it had led her to herself, to her own strength and value. And it had taught both her and Julian that real love does not ask you to become smaller or hide who you are. Real love sees you completely and chooses you anyway. As Emma felt Julian's hand on her stomach and thought about the life growing inside her, she smiled. Their story had started with broken glass and spilled champagne, with harsh words and public humiliation, but it ended with love, partnership, and a family built on respect and genuine affection. It ended with two people who knew that the best things in life are worth fighting for, worth risking everything for, and that was better than any fairy tale ending Emma could have imagined.